Welcome back to the Left Library, the home of simple political theory. Today we take a close look at one of Lenin's most urgent and practical interventions, the impending catastrophe and how to combat it, written in 1917 on the eve of the October Revolution. This is not a text of philosophical speculation, nor a utopian sketch. It is a revolutionary document rooted in the brutal material realities of a country in collapse. But it is also more than a response to crisis. It is a blueprint for how a socialist revolution can become a necessity, not through ideological desire, but because of the absolute failure of capitalism to maintain life itself. Lenin opens with a blunt assessment. Catastrophe is no longer a distant threat. It is a present fact. Russia, he writes, is, open quote, threatened with a catastrophe that is growing worse and worse, and which, in the absence of measures of an exceptionally revolutionary character, is bound to lead to a complete collapse of the entire social and economic life, end quote. There is no middle ground. Either the revolutionary class intervenes, or society disintegrates. What is crucial in Lenin's framing is that this catastrophe is not mysterious nor accidental. He refutes the liberal explanations of war mismanagement or temporary chaos. Instead, he insists that what is taking place is the inevitable result of the capitalist mode of production entering into a deep contradiction with social need. Open quote, everybody sees that the country is perishing. Everybody admits that economic disorganization is becoming monstrous, end quote. But what follows from this recognition? According to Lenin, the provisional government and the bourgeois parties, and even the moderate socialists, all acknowledge the crisis, but none are willing to act. Why? Because every necessary measure to prevent total collapse would mean confronting the foundation of capitalist property relations. Lenin writes, open quote, the danger is obvious, everyone sees it, but no one dares cast off the yoke of the capitalists and landowners, end quote. In this moment, Lenin turns the tables. The Bolsheviks are not the party of radical destruction. It is the bourgeoisie who would rather let the country fall than allow the working class to take power. Open quote, to tolerate the continued rule of the landowners and capitalists, end quote, Lenin says, open quote, means to prolong the crisis, to worsen it, to make it more difficult for the people to breathe, end quote. This brings us to the core of the pamphlet, Lenin's concrete emergency program. It is here that his genius as a revolutionary strategist and Marxist theorist becomes clearest. What he proposes are not abstract ideals, but immediate, rational, and technically feasible steps, measures which, he repeatedly notes, could be implemented even by a bourgeois democratic government, if it had the political will to do so. But since such will does not exist, the task always falls to the proletariat. The first and most critical demand is the nationalization of the banks. For Lenin, banks are not just economic institutions, they are the command centers of capitalist accumulation. Private banking allows the capitalist class to control investment, hoard credit, and sabotage social planning. Open quote, to bring about state control of the banks means to lay hands on the chief nerve of capitalist economic life, without which no serious reforms and no serious talk about regulation of economic life are possible, end quote. Yet even this most basic measure is avoided. Why? Because the state remains a capitalist state, and, open quote, such a state cannot lay hands on the banks, end quote. Next, he turns to insurance. Fragmented, privately controlled, and operated for profit, insurance firms, like banks, already function by pooling social resources. Lenin's argument is simple. If these funds are already collective in nature, why allow them to remain under private administration? Merge them, he says, into a single national system, controlled and accountable to the public, not the profiteers. He next addresses monopolies. not to critique their existence, but to seize upon their internal logic. Monopoly capitalism has already destroyed free competition and concentrated control in a few hands. Lenin asks, if this coordination already exists, why not direct it towards social ends? Open quote, capitalism has created the prerequisites of a planned economy, but capitalism cannot use these prerequisites. Only socialism can. End quote. Nationalize the monopolies, implement worker control, and direct production towards human need, not war or profit. And yet, this is not merely an economic proposal. It is about power and who gets to direct the future. Open quote, a government of the capitalists cannot take any serious steps towards controlling and regulating economic life. It is bound hand and foot by capital. End quote. At this point, Lenin shifts focus towards consumption and inequality. He calls for the introduction of progressive income taxation, a complete register of all incomes and property, and the expropriation of surplus wealth from the bourgeoisie. Lenin insists that this is not an idealistic demand for charity. It is a technical necessity in a collapsing economy. Open quote, to tolerate the rich consuming tens of thousands a year is a criminal madness. End quote. The hoarding of food, grain, and material wealth during a time of mass hunger is not simply immoral. It is counter-revolutionary sabotage. Lenin proposes immediate punitive measures for those who hoard, cheat, or speculate, insisting that such behavior be treated as a crime against the people. His final demand is perhaps the most philosophically profound. He calls for the introduction of a universal labour duty, including for the bourgeoisie, not just to keep the economy running, but to affirm a new social principle, that no one has the right to live off the labour of others. Open quote, compulsory labour service is not slavery, but a transition to socialism. End quote. For Lenin, labour is not punishment, it is dignity, equality, and contribution towards collective life. It is precisely in this demand that the ethical foundation of socialism becomes visible. Throughout this pamphlet, Lenin hammers the same point, that none of these measures require miracles. Technically, they could be implemented tomorrow. The only obstacle is capitalist property relations and the class dictatorship that protects them. What makes the catastrophe irreversible is not the lack of knowledge, but the lack of political dominance of those who profit from disorder. Open quote, not a single one of the reforms here outlined is beyond the strength of a truly democratic government of the people. End quote. And here Lenin lays bare the revolutionary horizon. If the bourgeois state cannot act to save society, then its existence becomes the principal barrier to survival. Socialism, in this formulation, is not a dream for the distant future. It is the only rational alternative to collapse. Lenin does not cloak this conclusion in moral appeals. He ends the pamphlet with a challenge. Open quote, if we do not now take the steps that are possible and necessary to avert catastrophe, we shall be driven backward, we shall be enslaved, we shall sink into a morass of ruin. End quote. A century later, as capitalism faces new and overlapping catastrophes like ecological breakdown, permanent states of war, and mass global inequality, Lenin's warning remains eerily familiar. The problem is not that the solutions do not exist. The problem is that those who hold power will not implement them. The Impending Catastrophe and How to Combat It is a document of its time, yet it speaks to ours with incredible force. It teaches us that revolutionary socialism is not merely a vision for a better world, but the urgent response to a system that has already ceased to function for the majority of humanity. We've been the Left Library. If you found this breakdown useful, be sure to like, share and subscribe. And if you have any thoughts on what you'd like us to cover next, please do drop us a comment. Until then, keep reading, keep thinking and keep organising for a world beyond catastrophe. Thank you.